Today, I'm joined by Marina Ashurkina. Marina has an impressive background in the industry going back 13 plus years, working on some of the voice technologies around the likes of Siri and Speak to It. She's been involved in startups. She's also authoring her book, which comes out with Mike McTear in early 2024. Um, Enjoyed this conversation because we covered a lot of practical aspects, delved into elements of regulations, concepts around hallucinations in large language models, and really a focus on the importance of conversational design. And I suppose, despite a lot of the hype in the industry, and Marina reiterated this, there still is a lot of complexity in building these solutions, and the complexity maybe has moved away from some of the underlying AI technology into other parts of the overall solution, such as we discussed a lot about prompt engineering and the importance of that, the context required for these solutions. So good listen to finish off our podcast for this season. So hopefully you enjoy it. I certainly did. Marina, good morning. Welcome to the Syndeo Podcast. Delighted to have you. Let's give a little bit in your background. Now, I obviously have some of your background from various interactions we've had, but you've been in this conversational AI industry, conversational design for quite a few years. Just give me a little bit of your background, and then we'll delve into some of the conversation around what you've seen in the past, what you're seeing now, and indeed where you believe the future is going with the industry.
Hi, Oliver. Thank you for inviting me. So just a little bit about my background. I studied linguistics and translation studies, English and German language. And right after the university, I was looking for something exciting, and I found a role in a startup which was advertising a job like we're teaching the machines how to speak, and it was something completely new. At that time, the only thing that you could learn about conversational dialogue systems at that time, or chatbots, was Siri, a presentation of by Steve Jobs in 2011. And at that time, gradually some assistants on phones started to begin. So from 2012, I was building a conversational an assistant. And I was working in a startup for 5 years. We built an assistant speaking in 12 languages and a platform, api.ai, which was bought by Google in 2016. And later I had my own consultancy company for 2 years. I also worked at Huawei building a multi-language platform and assistant in English language. And recently I was working at a startup building a platform already with generative AI and LLMs. Yeah. And yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Marina.
Yeah, just and since summer I was writing a book together with Mike McTear about transformation of conversational AI.
Perfect. I was going to come on to your book. We can maybe chat a little bit later about it. I think it's due out in February. I was speaking to Mike a month or two ago, and when I last spoke to Mike, he said he was busily working on 2 or 3 chapters to finish pre-Christmas, and I'm not sure. I assume you're maybe in the same position, and hopefully, given we're now recording this just pre-Christmas, the 20th of December, hopefully you are there or close to finishing.
Yes, we are finished. Actually, last Friday we submitted last chapters, and now it's just a little bit of editing and looking at the details like figures.
It must have been an interesting. When did you start the book? It was at some point earlier this year.
I think somewhere around July.
I was going to say it must have been. You mentioned there back in 2011 when Siri and that first came out, and you've been working in this industry since then. I would imagine, so that's what now, 2000, if I can do my math correctly, that's 13 years. Correct, yeah, it is 13 years, isn't it? Almost. In the last 6 months, I would have imagined the rate of change has probably been commensurate, if not more, in this industry than it has been in the previous 12 and a half years. And writing a book in that circumstance, I would imagine, where things are changing almost, if not totally on a daily basis, you must have found that a bit of a challenge, surely.
Yes, it was actually quite a challenge. Like the most important thing that happened was the release of ChatGPT, where everybody understood that the chatbots are now never going to be the same again. And the expectations from simple chatbots, they went up for everyone. Everybody is expecting to have like human-like, almost human-like conversation in the voice, in the conversation itself, in the flow. There are so many updates. Everybody's working on it. And I think the challenge is also, what I also thought about, is that a lot of companies are reacting to changes that are coming out instead of follow like a specific plan like we did before. When I worked at a startup back then, we had so much time and we were building the scenarios for months, and then for actually years we were editing this thing, and it was a robust thing. And recently, like when you work in the company, you constantly follow the news and try to keep up, which makes it really challenging for the teams right now to build products, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I actually noticed something, I think it was this week, around one of the car dealers in the US who had launched famously now, or certainly famously in the tech industry the last week or so, the ChatGPT enabled bot on one of their pages, and unfortunately didn't have guardrails around it, as we call it.
Yeah.
Turned into an interesting experience. I don't know what it actually cost them. Certainly brand awareness, or certainly, well, maybe it was, or more brand awareness rather than brand damage, but certainly it had the potential to have much more brand damage than maybe financial damage.
Yeah, of course. I also saw this example, and I think it was reposted many times. This is also the challenge, because I was talking to companies in very conservative industries such as banking or insurance, which are known to move slowly. They have a lot of department to check before you actually bring something to the user. And they also want to move quickly because they understand they have to seize this opportunity. And then such things happens that you publish something and it's not ready. Something is working not as expected, because users will test your product.
And yeah, I mean, I've seen the same in, with customers we've been working with as well for the last number of months. Certainly the early part of this year, there was a big desire to use large language models and ChatGPT like that, ChatGPT or Bard or Claude or whatever LLM, large language model that is. And I think there's been a little bit of a, I suppose, more common sense approach starting to be taken in this. Maybe I could through some of that hype cycle. And just recalling, I was actually on the podcast with one of the guys from Google in the earlier part of the year. And interestingly, Google had set, this was mid-year, I can't remember exactly when it was, they'd set up 4 proof of concepts in different areas for customer service to use their own large language model. And interestingly, 3 of those were actually stopped because they weren't delivering the outputs or the success that they had assumed they would. So I just thought that really interesting, that if one of the mega vendors in this industry who actually owns and is pushing the technology, if they themselves are actually running proof of concept and actually stopping some of those proof of concepts because they're not getting value out of them, that why other organizations are maybe not following the same approach, and maybe I think they're starting to do that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you. I just wanted to confirm that I agree with that.
So let's look a little bit at the historical. And I suppose if I start by, you mentioned there, in terms of your background, you were doing what we would have called more good old-fashioned AI or good old-fashioned NLU, pre-LLM. in conversational AI systems, if you're to summarize, what's the difference between then and now? So if you're building a solution, even, well, let's say it's 5 years ago, but I could even argue even 13 months ago, what would that have looked like and how would you go about it? And if you're building a solution today, what is the difference in those? Certainly, what's the difference in approach of doing that?
I think that like previously, before LLMs, you would start from zero and you will gradually actually add one intent and then 10 intents and then 100, maybe 200 intents. So you would start from a system where you would say hello and it would answer to you hello, and then to add any other question, it would answer like, I don't know, you have fallback intent. And then you gradually build up on that. And right now, if you want to start with generative AI, you have like the whole knowledge of the world, and you need to actually, you start not from zero, but you start from everything, and you need to condense it, to limit it, to reply only to those questions that you want. This is also a challenge. Mm-hmm. Before, we had to manage to give enough examples so that the system could correctly understand and classify the intents. And right now, we need to move everything that we don't need, move it out, and then make it respond.
Yeah. So I guess really what you're saying is on the old model, things were too narrow to make it really human-like, whereas today in the new model, things are much too wide. So a lot of the focus is on restricting how they engage, as opposed to getting data to promote how they engage. Which I think is a very, and again, we'll come on to some of those concepts around that. But if I look at large language models and the likes of ChatGPT, there's been a lot of hype. And I would argue, and being in the vendor community as well for quite a number of years, we used to promote, and again, for many years, the natural style of integration that you could have in voice bots, chat bots, be that in Siri or be that on a website, etc. But they actually never delivered that, because really they were very structured, I guess, in terms of, without going into the detail, almost if then else logic, which was all designed or coded at the time of implementation. And now the industry is saying, actually, we have a sea change in terms of how this can be done. Should we believe the vendor community when actually they say that? And the reason I'm asking is because this would have been very much promoted 5, 6, 7 years ago, particularly when chatbots come onto the scene, as in, they're going to solve a lot of problems. They're very natural because it's based on AI. The reality is that they weren't. Now, they still delivered a lot of value, but it was still a very much structured. And now the industry is saying, this is going to revolutionize the world. This is going to be, we're going to be able to type what as we want. We're going to be able to speak as we want, and it will just be all understood and recognized, and we'll see huge value from that. Do you think we're overhyping again?
I think that it is a hype, but I think it has great potential, and we are just in the beginning of it. Even in 1 year, we saw that there are a lot of improvements, a lot of new information. People were upskilling also. So I think it is going to the direction where it is going to improve the fluency of conversational interfaces. But for now, there are still cases that if you deploy generative AI to consumer-facing applications, still it can be risky. So especially if you don't only have one specific case, but like a broader cases. So I think it's still good to use the old-fashioned intent-based classifiers. So and maybe mix them. Maybe you can use generative AI for fallback, or you can try to integrate it slowly, upskill your team so that they understand like the real picture, not only the hype.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, which we'll pick up on. I suppose if I think about what you've been engaged in for the last 10 plus years, are there concepts there, leave aside the underlying technology, that still apply today, regardless of whether it's LLM based or, again, the good old fashioned AI based, or indeed, a non-AI based engagement model? Are there concepts and approaches there that should be reused today despite some of the changes in the underlying technology, or are we kind of at a blank page status where we're starting from scratch?
Yeah, I think that the conversation still remains a conversation, no matter which technology is behind it. It's still, I think that in recent years, there were a lot of books written and principles discovered what makes a good conversation, AI conversation with the computer better. And I think that these principles can also be applied for LLMs when you do prompt engineering, so that your sentences are not, so that the system doesn't reply it in a paragraph back to you, but uses the maybe shorter sentences, conversational style, which is better, for example, if it's voice-based or is it text-based. So we have a lot of legacy here that can be reused and applied for those systems, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a valid point. If we pick up on the prompt engineering side of things, it's again, in the tech industry, we've spawned another mini industry around prompt engineering and prompt design. I kind of would argue, going back 15 years ago or plus, when we were building IVR solutions that were DTMF touchstone, i.e. press 1, press 2, mm-hmm. There was a lot of thought went into the design of the prompting, because in any human interaction, how you ask the question will determine what response you get back. So if you're simplistically even looking for a response which is yes or no, how you ask that question will determine whether you get yes or no, or indeed you get some other relay back that's not what you're expecting. So, I mean, again, do you think there's a lot of hype around prompt engineering, or do you think it's really building on foundational stuff that we've been doing for years?
I think we need to distinguish, like previously prompts were called prompts, the replies from the systems, mm-hmm. right? And right now, prompt engineering is what we ask the system, how it should, like how we instruct the system, what we send to the system. It's our request to the system. So I think that you're completely right about how you ask the questions can actually determine the direction of the conversation. And this is, I think, with LLMs, because we have less control over them. I think we need to also implement this structure into the conversation still, because it can go into completely wrong direction and mm-hmm. never come back. With this, maybe the instructions can help, but sometimes it still goes in the wrong directions, and you can end up with a huge text of instructions, and LLM will still not follow it and mm-hmm. start to think of something new.
Yeah, I mean, you're picking up, and I think that's a very valid point, because again, going back to maybe the early part of the year when last year when ChatGPT first came out, there was certainly some assumptions maybe made, and I think wrongly made, that chatbots and voice bots would be changed forever, in the sense that it would be so easy to build these now that anyone could spin up a startup and turn out enterprise level interactions. But the reality, and the more I see it, particularly around what we're now calling prompt engineering, there's a lot of structure required, a significant amount of structure required, not only for the prompting, but for the context of data that's relevant and pertinent to the organization. And do you feel that the complexity now, there still is the same, I think, I know I'm certainly getting there, still is the same amount of complexity required to build these solutions? It's just the complexity has moved to a different part of the solution. So you have to design now, I'll use the word flow, and I don't necessarily mean that, but you have to design the interaction with what's now been called prompt. And that now is becoming a significant design approach to actually give, and I'll use the word intelligence, into the overall solution, because while there's a level of intelligence in the large language models for sure. It is only one small subset of intelligence. And do you feel that that complexity has been moved to other parts of the solution?
Yes, exactly. I think that it has been moved to the complexity stays the same, I think, but it was moved to another part. I think that if we want to create a robust product which solves some kind of a problem, for example, we can do customer support or help with selling something, it still has to be a flow. It has to have instructions and directions, because you will have to measure how it performs. You'll have to understand where you have problems, for example. You cannot have the whole conversation and not analyze it afterwards. So that's why you will still have some kind of steps to have some transparency around it. And it all requires effort.
Yes, and I think that, more of the, certainly at an enterprise level, organizations are starting to understand that. And it's back to the point you made earlier about, the car dealer in the US who launched very quickly what seemed like a chatbot on their site and didn't have the right structure around it. Talk me through a little bit, I suppose, and bearing in mind our audience may have limited understanding of this. Prompt engineering in a large language model, what are the different approaches you can use for that, and why would you consider different approaches? So, I mean, I've read some about some of these now. I'll not profess to be an expert by any manner of means, but I know there are different approaches, and some have more value than others in certain circumstances. Do you want to try and give us a little bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, sure. I think prompt engineering is a very interesting topic, and I gave a few talks about prompt engineering. As I mentioned before, like we have LLMs, they have knowledge about the whole world, we would say, like the whole Wikipedia, thousands of books, everything that maybe could be scraped from the internet. So they have this knowledge, and sometimes we use when actually prompt engineering is something. If you send a sentence to LLM, you already did prompt engineering. You sent a request, but it's a little bit more complex than that. And if you give LLM enough context and instructions and details about what you really want, it can give you a lot more. I think that because we have such a long background in using search engines, we are used to give keywords or just a short sentence. We go to Google, we ask a question. So people with this background, they go to LLM and they also ask a short question. But I think that the interaction should be a little bit different with LLM. So if you can, for example, instruct LLM to act in a certain role. You can ask it to be a teacher, to talk to you as if you were 5 years old, for example. You can ask it to use different kind of analysis, such as SWOT analysis, for example. You can instruct it to come up actually with anything. So you can ask it to think step by step. You can ask it to give you a metaphor. So if you put enough time into structuring this prompt, as if you would actually, if you would think you have an intern in your company, for example, and this intern is capable of a lot of things, but it doesn't have a context about your organization, for example. So you have to put this context first into his head, and then the intern will do this. So if you have this approach to LLM and give enough context, it can actually surprise you and come with very interesting responses, and it can follow your instructions. So I think this is amazing about LLMs.
Yeah. And I mean, we all use the likes of Bard, ChatGPT, the interface that's online. Well, I think most of us use it. I certainly use it most days because it helps with various aspects of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Have you any practical tips there? I mean, I read or heard somewhere once a couple of months back that you shouldn't use negative terms such as do not do X or do not say Y or do not, because it actually kind of discounts that within the model and actually has the adverse impact that you're expecting. I don't know, maybe that's true or not. I don't understand. Sorry, I don't know whether that is true in the underlying LLM. But are there other things like that we should consider even in our everyday use of these systems?
Yeah, I think about what you mentioned about not using negatives. It's like don't think about elephant. You start to think about elephant. You have this context already. You brought it into your head. So mention the concept that you wanted to think about. I think because the context window is what it's like, the short memory of LLM, what it can have what it can have at this moment. It's like Claude has 200K tokens, which I think is around 500 pages. So I think because this context window is growing, and you can actually put more information and give more instructions, and I think that this is what makes the LLM also perform a little bit better. It can follow your instructions.
And I think that, I mean, I know a lot of the vendors are coming out with more releases, more iterations, and that context window is getting bigger in the number of tokens it can both receive and return. And I think, yes, that'll start to make the implementation maybe a little bit easier. Excuse me. Coming on to, we touched briefly earlier on some of the, I suppose at a high level, one of the concerns or one of the issues with using large language models is that it's so wide in terms of its training data and therefore how it could respond. Again, within the industry, we have a couple of concepts that have been popping up more recently, from fine tuning of the model to RAG, retrieval augmented generation approaches, and depending who you read and what you read, some of those are good, some of those are not good. Again, do you want to just give us a high level summary of those approaches as much as you can? And where do you see those approaches going over the next, I was going to say number of years, but it's probably over the next number of weeks, probably months, the rate of change.
Yeah, I think that retrieval augmented generation is an interesting approach to decrease hallucinations and to actually make LLM talk more about your data. And there are some, I know that for some companies it was working really well. There are some limitations still. For example, if you have too many data, you still have to check what's inside this data, because LLM will just take, if it's a lot of unstructured data, it still can have some outdated information. So this is, it will require effort with checking these documents, this data, and preparing them. And with, yeah, sir.
No, go ahead.
And just wanted to mention, with fine tuning, I think it gives the opportunity to train the model, like open source models, probably, on also to give to show the examples of how this LLM should respond to how the company is used to respond to typical questions. It can also help, I think.
Yeah, and again, I think, back to the complexity that we talked about earlier, while some of the complexity hasn't moved away from, the creating the training data and definition of intents and entities, etc., because that's now all largely contained within the model. I think that from what I can see, and I don't know whether you concur or see this as well, I see that complexity now moving much more towards that data retrieval, and I'm talking about for a large or any organization who wants to use this technology. So data retrieval, data cleansing of the data that they have within their organization, so that can be provided as context to the interaction through the LLM. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, I think so. And also maintenance of the actuality of this data so that it stays up to date. It will require new tools, I think. And yeah, the complexity is there.
I mean, again, you can tell by my appearance, for those of you who can't see this online, I'm in my 50s, so I've been around the industry for quite a while, and I do have a wry smile when I think about probably 25 years ago building systems that we call single view of customer and single data. And that today, okay, the terminology maybe has changed, is still massively important to helping these types of new systems work, because it's the classical rubbish in, rubbish out. If your data is not clean, if your data is not there, if you don't have a full picture of your data, then do not expect a large language model to work in any kind of perfection. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face. Apologies again for anybody watching this online. Our lights have just gone out because I'm sitting too silent, so I'm going to have to start waving my hands around in future. But I know, back to the point, yeah, I do have a wry smile because I do see, a throwback to some fundamentals that still exist today that existed 25, 30 years ago.
Yes, exactly. And I have some experience working as project manager, and I know how hard it is to support the documentation and how quickly it goes out of date. That's why it will require like data cleansing and working with data and building proper technologies to support this. It will require a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I think, again, having been involved in a number of conversations at senior levels with organizations who, as I said at the start of the year, were massively keen to use generative AI and ChatGPT, and very often one of the questions that I would ask, or a couple of the questions, is one is, what do you want to do with it? And of course, most executives haven't thought about that. And secondly, what's the state of your data and where is it? And then they kind of look at you and go, well, we're not worried about our data. And then you try to go, well, actually, if you're not worried about your data, then you shouldn't be layering on something like generative AI to do anything massively meaningful. Yes, you can get some value out of it. So I think there's a lot of level setting going on within organizations, again, after the hype has subsided a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
And just coming on, a little bit around more into the conversational design aspect of things. We talked a little bit of prompt engineering. If you were, I'm sure you've been involved, obviously you've been doing this for a number of years. If you're starting out a project and you're talking to the stakeholders and they're keen to run a project like this, what are the sort of things you're looking for in terms of, how to measure success of a conversational solution, how to go, because again, it's the thing I've seen in the industry, it's maybe the understanding of that. And sometimes the senior leadership team within the organization struggle to put value on that. What are the things you would typically look for, at the outset of maybe when you're doing a business case around it, so that they can actually then put real value against it for that organization?
I think that as it was also done before, actually how the system is solving the business problem and how it's performing for the users, I think it's very important. So any conversational AI application or product should actually be valuable for the business, for the primary purpose it was built. For example, it should solve the problem automatically without with less handovers to human. For example, you can measure it still, even if you have a generative AI solution, you still measure that. You still measure customer satisfaction with a score. For example, conventional chatbots, they would have, can you rate us from 0 to 10, for example? I think what are generative LLMs, what are they're really great for is to build them into the pipeline. For example, even if you don't use them for customer-facing applications, if you still have a traditional conversational AI system with intents, but you can use LLM to get insights, because previously we had this. We could look at the conversations manually, for example, to go through them, or we could, for example, have some kind of quantitative data. LLMs are great in getting the insights. Like we can formulate a question: was the user suggesting any improvements? Was the user did we miss something in the conversation? And LLM can reply yes or no, and then we can look into this conversation. So it's a lot easier to analyze qualitatively with LLMs, I think.
And you mentioned earlier there, Ryan, we had a little chat about hallucinations and how they can cause issues. There's some, again, talk in the industry about guardrails and concepts of one LLM checking the outputs of another LLM. Have you seen any of that in action? And do you think it is a viable approach to help with either minimize hallucinations, reduce bias probably in terms of responses, etc.?
I know that this is in theory. This approach exists, that you can use LLMs to check if there are some kind of hallucinations. I know about that guardrails such as Nemo by NVIDIA. I heard that they are working great and better than just instructions in the prompt. I was trying them out myself, and they do stop. Like it looks to me, it looked a lot as Rasa when you were creating stories, and you would say, if the user asks this, do this, do this, and you have a lot of different scenarios, also manually written. In Nemo guardrails, you also add a lot of rules, and the system catches it before the response is sent to the LLM, which also can help to stop hallucinations, or to stop talking about topics that it should not talk about.
Yeah. Again, it's interesting. We come back to this concept, which I think has been in the industry for a while, is the flow concept, or the logic that we still have to build around it. And the more I speak to people, the more I see myself actually there. That logic, I just see it's moving into a different part of the solution. Whether it's exactly as you're saying in the video, are you defining, if it says this, do this. If it comes back with this, do that. We're kind of. I think, yes, the conversational aspect of it will definitely be better, but there still is a lot to be done in terms of thinking through these solutions, thinking through the use cases that are pertinent to you as an organization, what it is you want to achieve, picking the right use cases, because again, it's not a case of let's roll this out and get it to answer every question that we could never think about. So I think the industry is starting, certainly from a customer as well as a vendor perspective, starting to think more along those lines of it's, like you mentioned earlier, it's back to around what's the business value, what are you trying to achieve here with a solution, regardless of it's LLM based or not.
Yeah.
We mentioned briefly earlier there about you talked about the different types of models, and open source models and open foundational models. Again, without going into the technical detail, like open source, obviously from a tech space, has been around for quite a number of years. Of concept of it, I know it's slightly different in terms of large language models. How do you see that evolving? And I suppose if you, or maybe you are a gambling woman, where would you place your bets? Is it something like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, who are the purveyors of the big models, or is it the meta approach and the open source world? I mean, where do you see it? Who's going to win, I suppose, is a simple question.
I must say that I'm amazed with the speed and with the variety of things that are coming out. And we can also see that there are some parameters such as context window or multimodality or be it what the companies are competing, or companies or open source models are competing for. So I'm not sure if there is going to be a winner, but I like that there is a competition, and it actually helps to move the industry forward. So looking closely on what is going to happen.
For sure, and I think that's only a healthy thing, because I think whatever 9-10 months ago, when OpenAI, obviously heavily backed by Microsoft, came out, everybody kind of thought the arms race was lost in terms of there's one winner. This is going to wipe the floor, and without demeaning Google too much, they obviously launched hard in a quick case to try and maintain at least airtime, and unfortunately elements of it fell flat quite quickly. But I think you're right. I mean, the industry generally, whether it's multiple now what I call mega vendors, or the open source movement, which is, again, not demeaning the investment the likes of Microsoft and Google are putting into this, but I think the innovative approach for some of the open source movement is starting to really change the needle again and make it much more accessible, both to customers and vendors.
Yeah.
And I don't think that itself doesn't come without its headaches as well, as with all open source type approaches. I don't know if you've been following it more recently, the EU regulations that are coming out, and I know the similar regulations going through Congress. I mean, what's your thoughts there, and regulation, and is that a good thing, a bad thing, or should we do more or less?
I think that's actually a good thing, because it like there are a lot of risks with there is a lot of maybe fear also around, is it going to replace people, is going to do our tasks for us, is it going to be regulated, will we use it for different kind of stuff? So I think that because there is such a discussion about it, and because actually it pushes the companies to be more transparent. It was also a fear that it's a black box. We don't understand which training data is used, copyrighted. Can companies use it to integrate in their own product? So there are a lot of aspects in that. Also in ethical things, for example, that it should be, the training data should also be balanced and inclusive. So I think that because these bodies are coming in and having a voice there, I think it's great, actually.
Yeah, and I see the challenge. I mean, I agree with you. I think regulation is absolutely required, and it has to be regulation outside of the industry, because I think it is shown, and certainly in the tech world, and many guys, internal regulation, so to speak, i.e. tech companies regulating themselves, has never really worked. I think the challenge that the regulators face, both, whether it's EU, US, or globally, is how to strike the balance with the right level of regulation without actually impacting the speed of change and the innovation. To me, the challenge is too much regulation is going to slow down, particularly smaller organizations and smaller companies, who are the ones that tend to innovate much more rapidly than maybe the larger organizations. And sometimes regulation, and I've seen it, with things in the past, such as, GDPR, the General Protection and Data Regulations that the EU brought out for a period, that actually stifled, I think, a lot of the smaller smaller tech companies, who had to take their eye off innovation and focus much more on, are we complying with the regulations? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that there's absolutely a balance to be struck there. I think that's incumbent on the regulators as well as the industry to make sure we get that balance right.
Yes. Yeah.
If and I'm conscious we're probably coming up against time. I'm going to try and do a full circle with you here, and back to your early days of working with Siri and Speak to It, which were voice-enabled platforms, I guess. And if I look at probably Siri and maybe more Alexa, again, there was a lot of hype. I don't know. Alexa must be 10 years old, is it?
Yeah,
If not more, if
there
not,
was.
if not more. Again, whenever it came out, there was a lot of hype. It was going to change how we lived our lives. It kind of fell flat on its face, for want of a better word, within, I think, I know, within the time period, because it didn't have the conversational style, and again, the likes of Alexa and Siri Home that were based on good old fashioned AI, where you basically had to define your intent and what you expected the user to ask, and you had a set response, basically. And you were heavily involved in that conversational world. Do you see that the likes of large language models is going to breathe new life into those sorts of platforms? Or do you see they were kind of technology solution looking for a problem that never existed?
My guess is that they will, because first of all, because as I mentioned in the beginning, I think that our expectations, like the users' expectations of such platforms, are much higher after November 2022 when ChatGPT was released. And that's why the teams will try to live up to these expectations. So I think that Alexa is already using some kind of generative AI you can evoke it and have like a conversation. Like Siri, I think is still Siri, which it was before, but I'm sure that Apple is working on it as well. My guess is also that we will have in the future, I don't know when, but in the future, the personalized assistants are going to be a big thing, because personality and persona building, like right now you have the same Siri on the phone that I have, and you have the same Alexa as I have at home. But I think that they will be hugely customized, and I will have my own assistant. And also with this context window that we talked about, I think that it will be a great thing that this assistant will have memory, actually. Right now, I ask Siri something and it forgets the next minute I ask the next question. So the context was like really small just to have a follow-up question. But I think that the personalization will also be in context and in long-term memory. So I'm really looking forward to it, because this was always a dream in this industry, I think, to have a personalized assistant. And there are movies about perfect as personal assistants. So everybody is waiting for it.
A few of those movies going back probably 20, 30 years,
yes.
I'd say, if her and others, if we're actually going to live up to that. Do you see, and I think it probably is a natural evolution, that it will move to the device, as in the I'll call it a large language model. By definition, if it's running on a device, it's probably not going to be a large language model, but it'll have similar intelligence to that. Do you see that moving to the device, ultimately the phone in the first instance, and then to other smaller devices in the home, the classical Internet of Things devices that are installed on every application or every product we're using?
Yes, yeah, I think so. Even 5 years ago, when I was working different projects, it was already an idea that ideally it would run offline on a small device, and it will have this memory. So I think many teams are working towards it, but maybe we just have some missing components right now to implement it. But I'm sure this is something that, like a North Star in personal assistance.
Yeah, and I think, and I was chatting to, who was it earlier in the year? Evan Kirstell, who is very much, he's based in the US. I don't know if you know Evan, very much in terms of edge devices. We started to discuss, and particularly with the prevalence of 5G, 6G, and the bandwidth restrictions, again, seriously moving, that the devices are potentially going to remain relatively dumb. But with the prevalence, as I said, of the likes of increased bandwidth and new wavelengths for 5G, 6G, that these edge devices will have access to a lot more computing power. So I think, yeah, there's a debate, and I suppose depending who you are. So if you're Apple, you will obviously want to focus with the intelligence on the device. If you're Google, you'll want to focus on the intelligence in the cloud. So it'll be an interesting juxtaposition, I guess. So I don't think necessarily the battle is between cloud providers, I see it as much the battle now going into the device providers versus the cloud providers, and where that intelligence resides and bandwidth, etc.
Yeah, maybe you also saw. I came to my mind two examples. Meta is building an AI assistant, which is going to be available on in glasses and in headset, and also there was a concept of AI pin. Also, when you just have a device without screen, without anything, and you can talk to it. And have like this fluent, perfect conversation, and it knows everything about you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Maybe Zuckerberg did get it right with the metaverse, and maybe that's what we're all actually moving to. Maybe he first seen all of this and has called the right bet. I think one thing for sure, the change is not going to stop here. And I again, having been involved in a lot of these systems for many, many years, back whenever it was quite dull IVR solutions. The one thing I've seen in the last 12, 24 months, the excitement and the buzz around being in the industry. And now most people, when you mention what you do, regardless of their technology background, kind of understand it. And you go, at last, it'll take me 20 years to explain what I do.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Somebody now finally understands it, or the man or woman in the street does. So,
yeah.
Listen, Marina, it's been great chatting to you. I've usurped an awful lot of your time from sunny London this morning, and if you're watching online, you can't see the sun, but Marina has assured me it's streaming into her windows in London, unlike where I'm based at the moment. Good luck with the rest, with finishing the book. Just give me the title and your expected launch date then, and hopefully some of our audience will sign up for it. I think you can sign up at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, it's already available on Amazon. So the title is Transforming Conversational AI. It's by Michael McTear and by me. So. Yeah.
Well, definitely, I'll be. I did say when I spoke to Mike a few weeks ago I would sign up. I haven't yet actually, but that's certainly on my to-do list before I sign off for Christmas. Good luck with it, with finishing, and hopefully things don't change too much between now and early 2024, and you don't have to rewrite much of it. I look forward to catching up again soon, Marina.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Thank you for inviting me. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you. Have a great day.